Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this wonderful December 11th, Thursday, for our TechHub Marketplace webinar series webinar of the quarter, Safety by the Numbers, Tracking KPIs that Power Performance and Profit. I'm here with Sarah Bellini-Ross and with Monica Patel. Monica is from KPA. Sarah Bellini-Ross is the owner of Evolving Innovation. So excited to have them here with us to present. I think you're going to get a lot out of this presentation. It's going to be very dynamic, very engaging. So let's just jump right in. I want to give them as much time as possible to present. Thanks for being here today. Before I hand it over, I did want to take a few minutes to just remind everybody about Work to Zero and about our mission and our program. So as I mentioned, this webinar is part of the TechHub Marketplace webinar series. The TechHub Marketplace is a platform that is a project within the Work to Zero program at the National Safety Council. And our mission is to eliminate workplace fatalities by 2050 through the adoption of emerging technology. So we pioneer and advocate for technology in the workplace, which is why we are here today. We've been around since about 2019 was when we were founded, and we are here offering a variety of different resources and opportunities for individuals to get involved and get their hands on some technology. Next slide, please. I almost jumped ahead of myself, but there are 3 different ways in which Work to Zero achieves our mission, and that is through our research and our educational opportunities and partnerships. So Work to Zero produces research papers, white papers, reports, case studies that investigates the most effective technologies and ways to integrate them into the workplace. Please feel free to check out our website for access to all of those reports. We have guides, we have sort of spotlight papers on different technologies, all kinds of resources for you to educate yourself about what's available and how to implement it in the workplace. We also have educational opportunities, such as this webinar, to provide you the training, the demos, the access to the information to help you increase adoption of technology in your workplace. We are present at a variety of different NSC conferences as well as conferences with external partners. So we're really trying to make sure that we get the word out there and get people familiar with technologies and what's available. And then we also have partnerships. So we foster key partnerships with stakeholders in the field to strengthen everyone's work. This includes industry professionals. This includes SMEs, safety technology solution providers, insurance providers, and CCCO Foundation is one of our partners. So always looking for ways to get individuals involved with Work to Zero so we can get information to their members and vice versa. Next slide, please. So a little bit of information about the TechHub Marketplace. I mentioned before that the TechHub Marketplace is sort of a project within a program. So the TechHub Marketplace is a searchable directory of NSC-approved technology providers. Its mission is to connect safety professionals to technology providers that can make their workplaces safer. So KPA is one of our priority partners, and we thank them for being here today and for presenting this presentation. If you are a tech solution provider and you want to learn more about the TechHub Marketplace and how to get involved, there is a link there to support you in the journey to get your tech listed and to learn a little bit more about the partner benefits. And if you are looking for tech solutions to implement in your workplace, there's a link there for you to start searching solutions. We have about 30 solution providers listed, ranging from MSD prevention to impairment technology to EHS software. So I encourage you to check it out. Next slide, please, Monica. And last but not least, I did want to take a minute to give a shout out to the McElhatton Foundation, who is our champion donor for both the TechHub Marketplace and the Work to Zero program. They've been with us since day one, and we truly appreciate their support to help make this webinar possible. Thank you to the McElhatton Foundation. Next slide, please. All right, I think I only took about 4 minutes. Let's keep it that way. I'm going to pass things over to Monica and Sarah, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Hannah. Hello, everyone. With that, we just have a few slides, and we're going to leave a lot of time for Q&A today. So webinar again is Safety by the Numbers, Tracking KPIs that Power Performance and Profit. So I will go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Monica Patel, and I am a software product manager, and I work for KPI. Prior to KPA, really, and being within software, I was in oil and gas for about 8 years as a field engineer, all in upstream. And I made the switch to software. So I have oil and gas experience, and I also have, I would say, like logistics industry experience as well. So because of my background, I love safety standards, of course, but I also really love operational efficiency. It's sort of like my passion. And I'm thrilled to introduce my co-presenter, Sarah Bellini Ross, who is the owner of Evolving Innovation. So Sarah is a safety technology consultant with deep expertise in occupational safety, ergonomics, and human-centered innovation. She works closely with organizations to identify, pilot, and scale emerging technologies that meaningfully strengthen their safety performance. She has a strong passion for using data and new technologies to drive better and more sustainable safety outcomes across the industry. And we are incredibly fortunate to have her here with us today. And I know that you're going to find her perspective really practical. So, Sarah, thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be joining you.
And here's just a really quick agenda for what we're going to cover today via slides. We're going to talk about why measurement matters, of course, what you want to keep in mind as you're selecting your KPIs. We're going to get into employee engagement and why that's so important. We're going to talk about data and how it can help you with things like storytelling, right? And of course, we're going to do a large part of this as Q&A. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Monica. Do you want to go ahead and share the slides for us?
Oh, I thought I was sharing.
I don't see them up. Does other people see them?
I can see the slide that says direct costs of an injury.
Okay, well, if everybody else can see it, I will just go for it.
Blind
So when
blind.
we think about, yeah, when we think about why measurement matters, we oftentimes are thinking about the costs of injuries, but oftentimes those costs are living in spreadsheets, and we sometimes we're not able to see the risks because our data is all over the place. Data is how we shine that light on what's working, and most importantly, what's not working, and where do we really need to intervene because it gets pretty expensive. When we look at some of the information from NSC regarding the direct costs of an injury, a non-fatal workplace injury is around $44,000. Yet, when we start thinking about what it really costs, that number really grows. When we start having time loss, it's $55,000. And in the really unfortunate event that somebody loses their life on the job, we're looking at that direct cost of $1.4 million of direct costs alone. So, for what does that really look like for a lot of businesses? That means we're erasing all of the profit potentially from an entire month of production. For a lot of small and medium-sized organizations, that single serious injury can wipe out your entire safety budget, training plans, or any of those upgrades you were planning on making. And for a lot of companies in today's economy, where we're operating on really, really thin margins, these fatalities can sometimes cost businesses their livelihood and their business viability. So this really helps us to understand why that measurement's really critical and how data helps us prevent those events that can have those astronomical outcomes, both on the individual level, but also on the financial and business operation level. You want to go ahead and go to the next slide for us. So when we talked about direct costs, those are the ones that are really easy to see. But with every injury comes a lot of these hidden and indirect costs. That's even more important to be able to actually track and accurately speak to how much these injuries are really costing the business. We know that indirect costs are often 2 to 7 times the direct cost of an injury. So that $44,000 injury starts looking a lot different when we incorporate those indirect costs into the picture. So for that fatality, that $1.4 million, if we're going 2 to 7 times that, that's where we can really see how much of a ripple effect these serious injuries and fatalities have on the workplace. When we know someone's injured, it's not just the productivity drips, the morale across the entire team drops. I am so sorry. I am stumbling over my words this morning. There is not enough coffee in the world to help me today. But we also know that when things happen that go wrong on the workplace, it takes a lot of time to recover. We're spending hours on investigations, the paperworks, reassignments, figuring out that coverage when somebody's not able to be on the job. We also know that insurance premiums increase. I come from the workers' comp world. That's what got me started looking at how emerging tech can really change and prevent these injuries. Because we know when we have a significant injury on the job, those insurance premiums, they don't just increase that next year. It's oftentimes for several years, you're paying that increased cost. So that's how these costs really start to add up very, very quickly. So without that strong measurement piece, oftentimes these indirect costs are harder to measure and sometimes get lost in the numbers. And what we know is if we don't see the problem, invisible problems rarely get solved. So that's the key reason of why we want to be able to have some strong KPIs that can help our data tell the story of where we need to focus our efforts. You want to go on to the next slide for us, Monica? So when we think about how do we turn our data into KPIs that really matter, this is where we need to think about what from the field, how does that trickle up into the job metrics, to the scorecards, to be able to really determine areas where we can make that difference. How do we assess what data is really being collected and how is that data being shown so we can start picking up on some of those key trends, key performance indicators, and we start looking at those leading indicators instead of just relying on lagging indicators. Anything you want to add on this, Monica?
Well, I think that this leads like really well into the next piece of this. So I'll go ahead and move us forward into that. So let's talk about selecting meaningful KPIs and what that's going to mean for your safety programs, right? So when it comes to safety performance and ROI, the most meaningful KPIs are the ones that actually help you prevent incidents, right? Not just reporting on them after the fact. So we know that injuries are expensive. We saw that earlier in this deck. Sarah did a really great job of going through what those costs look like. And we know that the more proactive you are about safety, the better the outcomes. And that's both in safety and financially, right? So, and this is where the right KPIs come into place. So most companies, they're tracking the basics because they have to. So we're talking DART, right? TRIR, recordables, workers, comp claims, of course. Those are all important, but they are lagging indicators and they tell us what already went wrong. So to actually look at safety performance and ROI, we need to balance those with leading indicators. So things like near misses reported, things like hazards identified and corrected, participation, right? Corrective action closure rates. Those metrics really help us see if people are actually engaged and if our processes are actually working. And you don't need to track everything. I think it's really easy to sort of overdo it, right? You just need to track a few things that really matter to your organization that can actually lead to real action. And then, of course, help you tell that story of improvement. So when it comes to what you're picking, you need to make sure that you're always picking SMART KPIs. And SMART in this scenario means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and of course, time bound. And then you'll want that mix of leading and lagging indicators. And I always think this is fun to have in a slide, but the safety pyramid really illustrates that serious injuries rarely occur in isolation. They sit on top of a much larger base of those near misses, right? Of those unsafe behaviors. So when an organization tracks and addresses those lower level signals early, they're reducing the likelihood of the high severity events um, that we're hoping to prevent from occurring. So Sarah, that brings us to employee engagement. Sarah, actually, you're muted.
Once again, brain is not firing on all cylinders today. All right, so when we start thinking about employee engagement, if our employees aren't engaged in our processes, our data is not telling the full story. So this is why it's really critical to have employee engagement when we start looking at our data for our KPIs. One of the ways that we can do this is through using that pilot program. If you want to go ahead to the next slide. So if we're able to start thinking about how can we make these processes that we know are really critical to getting the data that we need for our programs, how can we make it digital to make it a little bit easier? When we think about why we don't get the data we want, a lot of employees resist reporting. It's not because they don't care, it's because the process takes too long, it's cumbersome, and it doesn't flow within their workday easily. If reporting a hazard takes 10 minutes because you have to go to the SharePoint, you have to find the form, you have to fill out the form, and then you have to email it to somebody. And we're asking our employees to identify any hazard they see. So if they see one a week, and we have 200 employees, we're looking at 33 hours of paid time to report those hazards and a lot of heartburn along the way because it's a cumbersome process. But if we were to digitize that process and have it be quick, simple, easy, and efficient, now it takes 60 seconds. Employees are more willing to identify those hazards when they stumble across them from their day-to-day operations. And what we used to be spending almost 33 hours of time on now looks like 3 hours a week for that workforce. So that's where when we can start a pilot program, we're able to find the rub points. We're able to see, is this process going to work well for our workforce before we fully invest, before we roll it out completely? This allows us to make those small changes early on, where it's still nimble and possible to be an easy change before it's too late. It helps us identify what are the other things that we need to think about and where are the opportunities to make it an even better process through that pilot process. It really also gives that employee engagement possibility where employees have their opportunities to talk about what they like about the process, what could be better, and how it could work even better for them. That ownership starts seeing a huge difference when we come to utilization down the road. If we're piloting it with the employees and having them help refine the process versus giving it to employees once the process is done and asking them to participate at the end. That early on pilot participation is really critical for that. We want to go on to the next slide. We can talk about how that stakeholder engagement really benefits us. We know that engagement is not just simply participation, it's really that true ownership. And with that comes that need to establish those clear expectations, especially when we start talking around data. And that's where we need to have our stakeholders engaged very early on. So we're able to develop that consistent communication. What's the why behind we're doing all of this work to get our data where it needs to be? Why are we working towards these KPIs? And having them encourage that employee feedback. And then especially in organizations where we maybe haven't had as much opportunities for employee feedback, having stakeholders carry that message that we want to hear from you, we care about what you have to say, and we will use this to make changes is really critical. When we can have those stakeholders set that tone early on, it prevents us from having to go back and kind of change that messaging down the road. And employees see their input and influences start changing the processes. Engagement becomes really that shared commitment instead of just looking to leaders for owning the process. And one of the other ways that we can really build engagement, if we want to go to the next slide, is really looking at these milestones. Oftentimes when we're talking about digitizing things, people get really frustrated with how long it takes. But that perspective is everything, as we see in this fun clip, right? Somebody can't keep doing this forever. If I have to add an attachment to an email and put a digital signature on it using, Microsoft Paint because we're not using easy processes, it feels like it's forever versus to somebody else, it's been 20 seconds. What are you talking about? And that's where we have to celebrate these milestones. Sometimes we lose progress along the way, and just celebrating those small wins deserve action. So if we're digitizing our near miss reporting process and we see a 20% increase, we need to celebrate that 20% increase because that is 20% more data that we weren't even aware of previously. 20% more opportunities to really prevent those injuries and make a difference. So that's when we start thinking about how are we using this data? We're not just using it to be able to make changes. We're using it to be able to celebrate successes on a small, early scale to help motivate those changes long term. We know that most of the improvements that happen in safety are really small and incremental in the beginning. We don't see huge changes. And this is where having the data and the insights early on to be able to see these small milestones allows us to give the recognition to keep that momentum going, to show employees that what they're doing really matters and it's making a difference, not just to the safety metrics, but to the overall well-being of the organization.
Perfect. And then this is where I take it for an example of an organization that chose to digitize their safety program. And so this organization is called Rappahannock Electrical Cooperative. I'm going to call them REC from this point forward because that is a mouthful. So REC is a utility company that provides electrical services across Virginia, really. They've got a workforce of about 450 employees, 250 of them working outdoors. And then, of course, they're also managing a fleet of 300 vehicles. So for them, their goal really was to maintain a strong safety culture. And so for them, it needed to be more than just a checkbox, right? Keeping their data organized and accessible was also a critical piece of that safety culture. So they faced hurdles just like any organization does, right? They needed to build that culture of safety and accountability where workers weren't just aware of the safety protocols, but they were also actively taking responsibility for them. So things like incident and safety forms needed to be filled out accurately and on time. And that, of course, isn't the easiest thing to do when you have 30 plus paper forms that you're trying to digitize. And then on top of that, they needed reliable data to spot things like trends and getting those trends in front of their executive team as part of the meaningful reports. So to tackle those challenges, REC decided to digitize their safety program. And they took a few things into consideration when they did that, right? They shopped around for that. They wanted something that was easy to implement. They wanted a partner in the software space. They wanted hands-on support, right? That was very important to them. They wanted a really easy to use interface as well as a very solid mobile app for their outdoor workforce. And making sure that they made the right decision in their digital partner establishes that trust with those stakeholders, like we were talking about a couple slides ago. So results have been really great for them. Moving to digital has dramatically improved their incident reporting. Employees are much more engaged. They are accountable for safety, which has created that stronger safety culture in this case. And they've seen some major improvements in managing their safety equipment. And then, of course, they were able to implement in that reporting and analysis for their executive team with real-time data, right? Which gives those insights and those safety trends at a moment's notice. And yeah, the results were great. And it's a really great example of how moving to digital can sort of be a game changer when it comes to your safety program and that reporting. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, this next section is me too. So speaking of, oh, actually, Sarah, I saw you came off of mute. Did you want
Go
to
for
add?
it. Nope, you're
Oh,
you're
okay.
good. Roll with it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's talk more about data and that storytelling, right? So I think everyone likely understands the concepts of silos, but just in case, silos are like composites of information that aren't connected in any meaningful or efficient way. So in this picture example, what that means is data one isn't talking to data two and vice versa, right? So completely separate, even if the data is related in some way. So a lot of people talk about silos in terms of arms of an organization, right? One org maybe isn't talking to the other org, and it's always bad. Nobody's ever talking about silos like it's a great thing, right? Certainly something that people want to avoid. And the same is true of your data. You want your data to be connected versus completely separate. So think about, to like tie this back to EHS and safety, think about your incident reports living in one system while your corrective actions are maybe tracked elsewhere. So that's definitely inefficient, right? So some more examples. We talked about the first one on this slide here, but imagine your training record sitting in an LMS, which is disconnected from your compliance checks, or your incidents being handled in a separate system versus your fleet management, even if the incident was caused by a piece of equipment in your fleet. Another really common one that I've seen through my experience is um, the lack of connection between HR systems and EHS data. So, for example, how great would it be if an employee's incident history was actually within their HR profile? And then last one here is pertaining to a lot of sites, right? So, how about those of you that have a lot of sites that you're managing? How does that information and that data get back to your corporate group? So these are all just examples, but each one of these disconnections can create friction. It can create manual work. It can definitely create gaps in communication. And of course, any slowdown in the access of information can create risk. So let's talk about the real cost of data silos, right? On the surface, they can seem like minor inconveniences. But over time, these disconnected systems, they start stacking up those hidden costs that really like bleed into every part of your organization. And the more silos you have, the bigger that upward trend in hidden costs. Okay, one more example, and I'll keep this brief here. So this is another digital leap that broke down their silos of manual entry. This is Monterey Fuel Company, and they are a business that handles aircraft fueling and ground services at Monterey Regional Airport in California. So they're very busy. They manage 40 flights a day, and then they also provide a concierge service. So things like booking hotels, coordinating ground transportation, etc. So behind the scenes, they were dealing with some challenges when it came to their safety program. I love this quote from Max because it's just very honest, right? Our old system wasn't even spreadsheets. It was just paper everywhere. If something did happen, it meant going through mountains of binders and bankers' boxes of random slips of paper. So you can imagine the silos. They weren't just digital silos, right? They were actual physical piles of disconnected paperwork. So in 2021, they decided to digitize and they implemented a safety software. In this case, it was KPA. So um, really, they implemented this across their safety program. So they wanted to implement in their inspection reports, their hazard identifications, and their STS management. Results have been great for them as well. So over the last couple of years, they've filled out over 2,000 hazard ID forms. They've logged 9,000 forms on the platform. That's nearly 10x what they were able to process with their old paper-based system. But it's not just about quantity, even though those numbers are fun. They also saw a big reduction in their lag time for things like repairs and maintenance. So things that used to fall through the cracks are now getting addressed quickly, and then they've significantly reduced their exposure to inspections and incidents. So another good example of what happens when you digitize a safety program and really make an effort to eliminate those silos, their data is now connected, right? It's centralized. And they didn't just streamline their workflow in this case, they fundamentally improved their safety and compliance outcomes. And that is the end of the slide deck here. So we promised we would keep it short. We're just at the 30 mark. And I hope you guys have questions that we can answer.
Thank you so much, Monica. We do have a question in the chat about the REC case
Oh,
study. They missed, maybe you could just go back to that slide.
yeah.
Greg has asked, he missed who REC is using in the app.
In the digitization. Yeah. Well, it's KPA. So, so yeah, so I am a software product manager for KPA. So my examples are from our bank of examples, but we do have a lot more public case studies available as well if you're curious.
Great. All right, another question. We have here, which KPIs are most meaningful for demonstrating safety performance and ROI across industries?
Yeah. So I think this was a section that I covered. I think maybe just a little further up. I don't know, Sarah, if you had any thoughts on this particular topic. If not, I can dive in.
Feel free to
No.
dive in
Okay.
and then I'll cover whatever you want,
Perfect.
whatever you missed that confuses
Okay.
you or color.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So I think that this question is sort of tricky, right? And when I say that it's tricky, it's that um not everything matters to everyone, right? So you just really want to pick KPIs that are important to your organization and that you think are actually going to lead to change, right? So I talked a little bit about some of the potential KPIs you could track. And then I talked about specifically making sure that they're smart, right? So are they specific? Are they measurable? Are they achievable, relevant, and time-based? This, I think, is actually really important, especially if you want to do comparisons month over month, year over year, etc., right? This is what I think is going to make it possible to share those metrics with your executive team and actually be able to compare for them, right? Because they're always going to want something that's better as time goes on. And let's see, what else do I want to say about this? Well, and one more sort of cautionary tale. I think it's really easy to measure everything under the sun, but it's really important to make sure that you are measuring things that, like I said, like you probably don't care that the glove was blue, right? You care that it was a hand injury or that it was maybe a near miss pertaining to hand injuries. So just I would caution you to measure things that matter to your program specifically.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in with some like specific examples for those
Yeah.
that maybe are a little bit newer to KPIs and some ideas across the industries that would be helpful to help measure your overall safety performance. So, I mean, obviously, looking at our incident rate, what does that look like? It's kind of that universal safety metric that we're talking about when we start looking at comparing our organization across to other organizations similar to us. That's how we can start seeing, are our overall activities, are they driving fewer injuries and lower costs? And that can be kind of one of those gold mark standards that we look to, is how effective is our program? But on the same token, we don't want to lose sight of that severity piece, because we can have a whole bunch of little reportable incidences, but that severity really also weighs in. It shows, are our incidents becoming very, very serious and costly with that opportunity to become fatalities? And that's where we can start to see some of those more lost time costs. So that's where looking at the severity and not just the overall incidence rates is really helpful. Knowing how much our incidents are costing per incident, that allows us to zoom in on where are those opportunities to really make a difference from an ROI perspective. That's one of the areas I help businesses a lot, is really understanding those buckets of where they're spending their money on incidences and where are those opportunities that we can use emerging technology or a digital process to help reduce some of those costs. Also, we want to make sure that we're using our data wisely. So another KPI that's really effective for a lot of safety programs is to look, how long is it taking to resolve these corrective actions? Once we're aware of something, how long is it taking us to close that loop? Because it's showing us how quickly are we acting on that data and getting hazards eliminated out of the work site. That shows us that our processes are working, our workflows are going, that these improvements in making our workplaces safer are happening quicker and quicker. So those are just a couple ideas. And then obviously thinking about near miss reporting. So we can really be focusing on that leading edge a little bit more than just relying on our reactive data. Those are just a couple of my thoughts around like specific ones that we talk a lot about with businesses.
Awesome. The Q&A box is blowing up with more questions. I did also want to remind the audience, we do have the chat closed. So if you do have questions, please navigate to the Q&A box, so the Q&A bar, and submit them there. So Melissa asks, any suggestions on how to set a number to your goal for a KPI? How much, for example, how much to increase by a percentage or quantity?
Monica, do you want me to take a first stab at this one? Or do
Sure.
you want?
Yeah, and I'll fill in after.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is where, right, you have to look at what's your organizational culture is. You don't want your safety to look very different than every other program. So if when you go to your executive meetings, if you have a scorecard and you're reporting on three KPIs, you may think a little bit smaller and focus on the three that really matter. Some organizations really like to have KPI measurement to death. But if you're newer to measuring KPIs and really tracking it, start small. Be successful with just a few critical measurements. Really make sure your data, your workflow, and your reporting and scorecards and dashboards are effective before you try to track 10 different KPIs. Because as you're establishing processes and getting used to it, it becomes pretty complicated the more KPIs you have, unless everything else is already digitized. So start small, maybe identify one key area of where you want to focus that. And then as you grow and digitize more and more, then you can really start focusing on more KPIs. But most people can't have the attention to really focus on more than 3 to 5.
I think that totally makes sense. And you also hit on another point here, where if you aren't digitized, right, it's hard to know historically what you guys have been tracking for those three very specific KPIs. So you might consider, looking for a digital platform that allows for historical uploads so that you can clearly see, what you guys are starting out with. What is your baseline?
Great. We have a follow-up question from Greg. Can you share a typical spreadsheet of KPI tracks as listed?
Can we share a spreadsheet of the KPIs as listed, like meaning on this slide?
A spreadsheet. Yeah, maybe Greg, you could add a little context of sort of what you're looking for. If KPA has any templates or things like that, maybe that's something that we could share in a follow-up. I don't know if maybe a template is what you're looking for. But yeah, his question was, can you share a typical spreadsheet of KPI tracks, I think, as listed? Oh, he says maybe just simple results. A spreadsheet. I don't know if that helps.
Um,
Do you have any
maybe.
templates?
We don't. So maybe Greg, what you're looking for are examples of others tracking these same KPIs. Is that what you're looking for?
Yes, he says yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Yeah, let me see what we have available in those case studies. There likely are some examples of KPIs that are shown to improve over time. Just like some of the other case studies I showed that were very specific about data collection, but I can see what we have in store for like very specific KPIs. My question to you, Greg, would be, is there any one or two in particular you would be most interested in? I guess tell us in the chat and I'll take a look.
Yeah, and Monica, if you have I don't know if you have a slide in here with your contact information on
Oh,
it, but maybe he could,
I think we do.
I think it was on the front side, and that way maybe he could reach out to you directly.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay,
Great.
more questions as you're navigating to the contact slide.
Oh,
Have you have you seen and reoccurring obstacles in agreeing on the important KPIs? If so, what advice do you have to get past them? Have you seen any reoccurring obstacles in agreeing on the important KPIs? If so, what advice do you have to getting past them?
Sarah, do you have examples?
Yeah, I do. I will
Perfect.
love to hop in on this one. So I would say, like, one of the biggest recurring obstacles I see when we're starting to establish KPIs across the business is really that different departments have very different priorities. And oftentimes when we start talking about KPIs, we get caught up in the semantics of the KPIs And so sometimes one of the ways to overcome it is to really understand what each department's really looking for and then finding that common goal in sight. So where from like safety, we're maybe really focused on near miss reporting from an operations perspective. That's early identification of potential process issues that may be leading to downtime. So it's finding that like common thread to get buy-in from all of the organizations because that's a key area that people spend a lot of time kind of fighting over the KPIs and not really focusing on the bigger picture. The other big obstacle that oftentimes happens is we have way too many KPIs on the table when we're trying to get it. And then that volume creates the confusion. We start getting into this culture that we want everything measured. So then nothing gets measured because it's such a big, overwhelming, scary, daunting process. So that's where we really have to think about what's mission critical, what is nice to know, but not necessary, and thinking through those really key things. And sometimes that limitation can help us bring the clarity needed to know what the right next steps are. Um, yeah, anything else you want to add to that piece, Monica?
No, I think you nailed it.
Thank you, Sarah. More questions coming in the chat. We have another one from Melissa. She asks or notes, we have our historical KPI data. I'm wondering if there are best practices for deciding what your next goal for that KPI should be. If a completion rate is currently at 50%, do you increase by 5% or 25%?
I think this looks is where having a look at your historical data is really helpful, right? How much progress have you been able to make in the past? If you're making 20% increases, then you can be pretty lofty. If you're really struggling to make progress, right? Once again, thinking back to Monica's slide about having KPIs follow that SMART template, realistic's really key. So this is where we want to have those small milestones. So maybe if we do have that big lofty goal, breaking it down into a small milestone so that we are realistic, that it is something that is actually achievable. And we're not just shooting for the moon, so we're not going to reach the stars in the process.
Yeah, to add to that, Melissa, what you could do is start small, right? Make it 5% and have an end date, right? And at the end of that date, did you hit it or not, right? Did you guys smash it? If you did, celebrate. Shout it from the rooftops. Tell all of your executive team that you guys nailed it and make your next goal maybe a little bit loftier, right? If you really knocked it out of the park. Um, but yeah, just another note on celebrating your inevitable win that I'm predicting.
I love it. Let's achieve all of our goals. Let's just smash through the roof. I love it. Okay, another question. When you work with, I think this might be more for you, Monica. When you work with these
Okay.
companies that are identifying the important KPIs for them, have you found a pattern of job positions or titles that are involved in that identification process?
Oh, well, so that's a little tough, but I'm going to try to answer it. So, at KPA, we work with a lot of different personas, right? The most common I would say is safety manager, director of safety, sometimes even like VP of safety, but it's all dependent on how large the organization is, right? So we service people who have 25 users all the way up to 50,000 users. But I would say the persona that I see the most getting implemented with our software is usually safety manager, safety director. And I don't know, Sarah, if you had a different viewpoint.
Yeah, oftentimes, like if we're looking across an organization when we're trying to develop these KPIs and we're trying to determine what's actually measurable given our data from our current state of existence, oftentimes we'll see like operational leaders at the table, we'll see HR workers comp type roles. Somebody from finance is really critical when we start talking about a lot of those indirect costs to be to accurately measure and track the indirect cost piece of it. And then we have to have our IT partners at the table very, very early on when we're starting to talk about this KPI. When we start talking about that silos of data, that's where our IT or data specialists within our organizations are going to be really critical. And then definitely you don't want to lose sight of your frontline supervisors as being a part of that process because they're such a critical piece of doing this KPI work and this data piece that we want them to be there at the table very early on so we can have that realistic perspective kind of from boots on the ground level before it's too late. So those are kind of some of the common jobs that roles that I like to see at the table when we're starting to talk about this, trying to hit the big buckets of areas that we know we need to have some coordination and collaboration.
Great. More questions. We'll just keep on going down the list here. So we reach the top of the hour as the questions keep coming in. How do you address data quality issues such as inconsistent inputs or a lack of standardization?
Yeah. So, from my perspective, I think oftentimes when you have inconsistent inputs, right, or lack of standardization across your form collection or just data collection in general, it's one of two things, right? Either your employees, maybe they don't see the value in the data collection, or it's too overwhelming of an ask, right? And I think we touched on that a little bit in the deck as well. So what I mean by that is maybe it's too many forms to start. You're trying to track too many things, or there are too many things to look at, right? So if either of those are true, the data quality is going to suffer. So what I've seen work really well is starting out with one process, and Sarah had hit on this with that excellent slide from The Office, right? Let's go back to that. Maybe it's this way. Fail. But you hopefully you're understanding the point that I'm trying to make here is you want to start smaller to not overwhelm people in what you're asking them to do. And then of course celebrating the wins as you get them, I would say is another important piece of this. As you look at the data, did participation improve, right? Did conversations get more consistent? Are we catching the issues earlier? And once workers see that the information that they're providing is actually improving their day-to-day safety, then they're going to get on board faster, I think is another key piece here. Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, right, we talk a lot about like garbage data and quality
Yeah.
of data, but until we understand like what's wrong with our data, it's hard to know how to fix it. So when we start looking at our data and we're questioning, is this quality data? Do we have those consistent definitions and reporting standards? Are we all on the same page of what a near miss is and what should be reported? Oftentimes what I'll see as an organization adopts some near miss reporting is one part of the business, they have a very different understanding of what a near miss report should be compared to another one. So when we go to look at numbers across near miss reporting, it tells two very different stories based off of that understanding of what that reporting standard is. So we can think about, are our standards and reporting the same? Or are we just not getting the data we need? Are we having missing data? Is our data coming in so late that it's no longer actionable because we hear about that near miss from 3 months ago? Or are we getting data that's just not complete? Are we getting part of the story, but not all of the information necessary? Something we see a lot with paper-based forms. People have a hard time putting pen to the paper and getting all of the necessary pieces on it. And those gaps can really distort our data in the long run. Is it that our data is getting messed up because of manual entry? Are we relying on going from a spreadsheet to another program to get that action created where we have an opportunity for those typos, those wrong dates, that wrong copy and paste, that we're pulling in the wrong data field and that's creating some data integrity issues? And then we have to think about too, right? Is our data quality because it's getting spread across so many different systems that maybe aren't using the same data field? So that's where, are we tracking safety training in our HR program and our safety program? And now we're reporting two different numbers because we're in two different programs. So that's some of the areas when we start looking at the quality of data, really thinking about it from a big picture perspective of all the different aspects it takes to have good quality data and to make sure that we're making that evolution possible of thinking through all of those steps along the way.
Thank you for that. We have a question from Justin. Justin asks, How do you effectively move a mature organization away from TRIR to more leading indicators as measures of organizational success, especially when your concern becomes less about safety culture and more about masking prevention? Good question, Justin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a hard one because a lot of the industry still really looks to TRIR. Even though we know it is very much of a lagging indicator, it doesn't really reward any prevention or proactive steps. And I think that's where having that really balanced scorecard of KPIs is really critical, that we're talking about near misses just as much as we're talking about actual incidences, that we're really focusing on having a KPI scorecard that's a good mix of the things that we need to measure from an industry perspective, but really focusing on having those leading indicators that are going to help us be more effective, that are really going to focus on making a difference proactively versus reactively. So thinking about that narrative that we're using with our data storytelling of why we're looking at it from the other ways and being able to kind of show when we're reducing those injuries, why that makes a difference in how our safety program's making that impact. And that's where, if we're only looking at our incidence rates, it's hard to show success if we don't have any incidents. So think about that as well. Are our KPIs, are they useful if we have zero incidents? If we have zero reportables, what story is our data telling us? And that's where we can be looking more at leading indicators to be showing the work that we're doing that's helping to drive that performance.
Anything you want to add, Monica, or I'll go on to the next question.
No, I think Sarah answered that pretty well. I think it's a tough one, right? But I think the answer makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah.
Great. We have a question submitted from an anonymous attendee who asks, any advice on how to increase reporting on near misses?
Yeah, I would love to jump in on this one. I'm a really big passionate around employee engagement. If you can't tell, like that's where I love human-centered design and innovation. And this is where near miss reporting is really a huge opportunity for this employee engagement. But in order to increase it, we really need to make sure our near miss reporting process is easy. If it's complicated and cumbersome, it's not going to happen. People are busy throughout their day. People are resistant to change. If it's a hard process, it's not going to happen. So first, I think about what's the minimal, easy, simplest process we can get the information that's necessary to make a difference. Making sure the purpose is really clear, that these near miss reports aren't just going into this vacuum of no action. So that's where having that strong feedback loop is really critical to increasing it. If as soon as the employee submits their near miss report, they're getting a, hey, Monica, thanks for caring about your team and making sure that we have a safe workplace. You know, if they get that recognition right away, and then that near miss or that hazard, if it's remedied right away, if we're acting on those near misses and they're seeing the results from that near miss. You mentioned that a cart has bad wheels and it has a potential to hurt somebody. They go in the next day and they still see that cart on the floor. Now they're not going to report it the next time because they're not seeing any action come to it, versus they make a near miss report about something and it is immediately removed from service. It is acted on. They see that change. It reinforces it. You also have to have a culture of safety where people don't feel fearful for reporting these near misses, where they don't have to worry about potential punishment or repercussions from identifying these near misses. And this is where it takes a lot of organizational trust and safety. And maybe we need to evolve and focus on that if we are struggling with our near misses.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if it's not easy, nobody's going to do it, number one. And number two, you just hit on, I was reading about this, Sarah. Have you heard of psychological safety?
Very much
Yeah.
so. Very, very
Yeah.
familiar with that.
It sounds like a scary movie, kind of, right? But no, it's totally like, do I have a fear of getting punished for reporting this, right? And so you might also consider allowing your employees to start off reporting things anonymously. There are a lot of digital safety programs that allow for that, like have that feature. And so maybe to encourage people to do near miss reports, you can offer it as an anonymous submission as well.
Yeah. I've also seen it really reward and recognition, having some
Yeah.
incentives, some random, prizes for people submitting it. But I think what really helps drive that is that clear understanding of what is a near miss and making sure that's communicated, because oftentimes employees really assume a near miss is somebody almost died, not these little potentials. That is what we really, from the safety perspective, we want to hear about all of those little things. We don't just want to hear about that big scary potential. And that's where making sure that standards for reporting is really clear and communicated multiple times throughout the process.
Great. Great conversation. We have about 5 minutes left. So we have more questions popping in the chat. So these are obviously generating some cool ideas and thought-provoking additional questions. Amit asks, how is the legacy data inconsistency addressed as we transition to newer KPIs? Does KPA support the entire data lifecycle through insights? And that's two parts to that question.
Yeah. Yeah. And can you repeat it for me, Hannah, the first part?
Okay. First part of the question is, how is the legacy data inconsistency addressed as we transition to newer KPIs?
Okay. So at KPA as a software organization, we do allow for the historical upload of your information, right? And so to do that, like let's say you're coming from pen and paper, or you're coming from your own spreadsheets, we would just upload the spreadsheet in. So you would like digitize your own historical forms, and then we would data load it in. Now, if there is a data consistency issue, you're going to be able to tell pretty quick because we have dashboards as part of our platform, right? And so I would say, number one, in the digitization, you're going to know if your data is bad, and we can start to piece together why it's bad. And Sarah talked about that a little bit as well. The second piece, I think, of the question was in regards to insights, right? Okay.
Yes. So the second part was, does KPA support the entire data lifecycle through insights?
Through insights. So I'm going to talk, and I never do this. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's upcoming for us as a software company, right? We are currently building out data insights of our own within our platform, where you'll be able to click, hey, do this fun insights thing for this very specific form, like maybe it's your incidents, maybe it's your misses, etc. And then we'll be able to spit back out commonalities between your data points, right? Things like, oh, hey, these incidents are happening when it's bright and sunny outside, when it's 50 degrees outside, when X, Y, and Z is happening. That is a future endeavor of ours and something that we're working towards today. So I hope that answers the question. I never talk about future things, PS, as a product manager, usually not what I do.
Yeah, you gotta be careful. Gotta be careful.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing a follow-up question from Amit, so I'm hoping that did answer the question. We have 3 minutes left, and I don't see any other burning questions in the chat. Any key takeaways or additional sort of final thoughts from Sarah or Monica that you'd like to share in our final 2 minutes?
I was just trying to get to our last couple of slides here, which I think, well, I'll just close it out from the KPA side. So we are an all-in-one EHS platform, of course, and we're here to help you digitize. I hope that the webinar was helpful, and I will make sure that everybody has my contact information. And Sarah, if you wanted to, oh, I don't know why it's doing that.
It's got a
No
mind of
worries.
its own.
Yeah, absolutely. At Evolving Innovation, we are a small but mighty consulting company. We come along safety teams and help you in order to deliver that world-class safety, health, and performance for your program. Where we really shine is we help teams as you're exploring, piloting, and implementing new technology. We help make that process a little bit easier and less scary as you're trying to figure out what's the right direction to go as you improve your safety program.
All right.
Awesome. I wanted to thank you so much for being here today and for presenting with us. You shared some wonderful insights. Now we're getting some congratulations in the Q&A. Great presentation and presenters. Thanks all. I'm glad everyone was able to join us today. Please have a wonderful, safe, and happy holiday. We look forward to seeing you at our next Tech Hub Marketplace webinar series in the spring. And yes, Monica and Sarah can share their contact information with you. We will be sending out the recording and the slides in a follow-up. But again, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your expertise, and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye, guys.
Bye.